In this video, I'm going to show you how US diplomats actually learn languages. And specifically, I'm going to show you 10 lessons that we can learn from US diplomats and the way that they learn languages so that we can actually learn languages faster and better. So what you need to understand is that US diplomats actually learn languages in a very efficient way. And so the goal for them is to reach about the equivalent of a C1 level in 6 to 18 months. And that depends on the language and how difficult it is to learn. And so the C1 level is very fluent. You can do pretty much anything that you want to do. So what I've actually done is that I have found a paper that is going to get us a lot of insight into how the Foreign Service Institute, or the FSI, actually teaches languages to US diplomats. And this paper is titled Lessons Learned from 50 Years of Theory and Practice in Government Language Teaching. The way that the FSI actually teaches languages to US diplomats follows a lot of the research that has been done on second language acquisition. But there's also a lot of information that they have acquired over 50 years of teaching languages to thousands of people that sort of goes a little bit against the grain and against the research. So let me first describe how the FSI actually teaches languages and what happens at the FSI. Students at the FSI, who are called Foreign Service Officers, the future US diplomats, actually spend a minimum of 5 hours of classroom time working on stuff like conversation, interview techniques, reading, and making presentations. And so almost all of this classroom time is spent in the foreign language, especially after the initial first few weeks. Classes have rarely more than 4 students, and there is 1 teacher every time. These teachers are actually native speakers of the language. Now, in addition to these 5 hours of classroom time, students at the FSI also do lab time where they study with vocabulary programs, videos they can record themselves, the type of stuff that you would really do on your own. And in addition to that, they also get homework to work on specific skills. Now, let me get into the lessons, and there are 10 lessons that we can learn from the paper. And so the first lesson is that mature adults can learn foreign languages well enough through intensive language study to do things in the language almost as well as native speakers. So what this lesson tells us is that even if you're an adult, even if you are 30, 40, 50, you can actually learn a language almost at the level of a native speaker, to the point where you're actually able to do most things almost as well as a native speaker in the country. In fact, approximately 2/3 of the FSI students achieve or exceed their proficiency goals at the end of the program. And I know a lot of people in my audience, maybe you're a little bit older, you're worried that you're not going to be able to learn a language, but research shows that short-term memory declines as we age. Yeah, that is true, but adult students actually know better how to learn languages. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at young children, it takes them approximately 12,000 hours to 15,000 hours to really learn their native languages. But at the FSI, adults spend about 600 to 2,200 hours in training, and they achieve a very high level of proficiency in the new language. And the reason why adults at the FSI are able to do this faster than children is because they know better how to learn languages. They're not going to develop the native accent that children are going to learn, but they're still able to function at a very high level. Now let's move on to lesson 2. And lesson 2 is that language learning aptitude varies among individuals and affects their classroom learning success, but at least some aspects of aptitude can be learned. In other words, some people are faster and more efficient at learning languages than other people. However, to some extent, it is possible to learn how to become a better language learner. The key here, according to the paper, is maximizing learning strengths to particular students. The paper is actually a little vague on what this means exactly, so my interpretation and my experience is that it's very important to be flexible and learn in a way that corresponds to your own aptitudes and your preferences. So in my case, for example, I learn a lot better using audio content content as opposed to written content. And so instead of doing my flashcards, which are incredibly useful, I don't do them using an app on my computer or on my phone. I actually developed an app called Fluent Falcon, which allows me to learn through audio flashcards. I'm going to put a link to Fluent Falcon in the description box. All right, now let's move on to lesson number 3, which is that there is no one right way to teach or learn languages, nor is there a single right syllabus. And that's what I've been talking about on my channel for a long time. You know, there are a lot of tools or a lot of programs out there to learn languages, and they all work to some extent. And the key here is to really select the tools and the programs that you're going to be consistent with and that help you reach your personal goals. So for example, personally, I'm much more focused on my listening ability and my speaking ability, because when I learn a language, it's not necessarily for work, it's just a hobby. I just want to talk with people. So in this sense, I really need to be listening and speaking a lot more than reading and writing. Even though the authors actually say that there's no one right way to learn a language, they also note that grammar should be introduced fairly early. So they found that it sort of creates a certain awareness for certain forms. And so if there's insufficient focus on form at the beginning, they say that learners may actually risk developing wrong patterns. All right, now let's move on to lesson number 4, which is that time on task and the intensity of the learning experience appear to be crucial. This is a pretty obvious lesson, but the more time you spend learning a language, the better you're going to get at the language. And as far as intensity goes, the authors actually say that focus practice of some kind, including drills, appears to be necessary for almost all language learners to develop confidence and automatic language use. And here, in part, the authors actually refer to a part of language learning which is referred to as fluency development. And so if you really want to develop confidence and automatic language use, you have to develop a certain proficiency, a certain fluency using particular activities. I've already posted a video that in part talks about this, so I'm going to put a link to this video in the description box. All right, now let's move on to lesson number 5, which is that learners' existing knowledge about the language affects their learning, meaning that having knowledge about things in the language, such as subjects, predicates, prepositions, tones, or similar concepts, you're going to assimilate the language better than if you are just, reading and listening and looking for patterns. And this sort of go in opposition to what a lot of people think nowadays, which is that simply getting input and consuming the language is enough to become fluent. And the point here is that there's some real value in learning about the language as opposed to just learning it. And so this can be done with textbooks, for example. Now let's move on to lesson number 6, which is that a learner's prior experience with learning languages or other skills also affects classroom learning. The authors actually say that prior experience of language study in a classroom is an advantage, especially if the student was able to reach a high level. So this lesson may actually be less applicable to people like you and me who are all trying to learn languages at home on our own for the most part. So regardless, having learned a language up to a high level is a huge advantage because you know which methods work for you and you know which ones do not. You have a confidence that your methods are actually going to work and that you're going to reach a high level of proficiency by applying the methods. And it's interesting because the authors also note that bilingualism acquired naturally as a child does not in and out of itself appear to aid in learning a third language in a classroom. Now let's move on to lesson number 7, which is that the importance of automaticity in building learner skill and confidence in speaking and reading a language is more important than has been recognized by the SLA field over the last 2 decades. Put in simple terms, learning how to speak and read very well, very fluently, is something that the research in language learning has overlooked for a long time. And so to develop this automaticity with speaking, I recommend that you use activities such as 4-3-2, where you talk about a given subject for about 4 minutes and then you talk about the same thing in 3 minutes, the same speech, and then the same thing again, but in 2 minutes. And so for reading, you can also use an activity called speed reading, where you try to read the same text multiple times and progressively faster. And the goal here is to reach a final reading speed of about 250 words per minute with good comprehension. And of course, let me know in the comments if you want to have more videos on speaking or reading. But now let's move on to lesson number 8, which is that learners may not learn a linguistic form until they're ready, but FSI's experience indicates that teachers and a well-designed course can help learners become ready earlier. So in other terms, the FSI actually says that when you are exposed to a language, there are lots of constructs that will emerge naturally as you read and you listen, but you may not actually be able to comprehend them at a given point in time. But according to the FSI, explicit instruction of grammatical form can help learners understand some of these constructs a lot earlier. As a consequence, focusing on grammar early can actually make an important difference. And once again, this may seem obvious, but I feel that I need to emphasize this here because a lot of modern approaches are really putting grammar on the back burner and sort of ignoring it to a large extent, if not like completely ignoring it. And now let's move on to lesson 9, which is that a supportive, collaborative, responsive learning environment with a rich variety of authentic and teacher-made resources is very important in fostering effective learning. FSI students actually have about 5 hours of classroom time a day with their teachers who are native speakers of the language. And so this enthusiasm for the teacher can be understandable because when you're learning a language on your own, it can pretty quickly become dry and boring without any human interaction. Now, for people like you and me learning languages at home, it's a little bit more complicated. So what I would suggest is a teacher on sites like italki or Preply. I'm going to put these links in the description box, but obviously this is going to cost a little bit of money, although it's pretty affordable. And what you can do is also try to find language partners, so people who are native speakers of the language that you're trying to learn. And so what you do is, for example, you have a call for 1 hour where half an hour is dedicated to them teaching you their language and half an hour of you teaching them your language. And I do this all the time for Japanese. Personally, I've gained a lot out of it, and it's very motivating. And now let's move on to the last lesson, lesson number 10, which is that conversation, which on the surface appears to be one of the most basic forms of communication, is actually one of the hardest to master. According to reports from former students of the FSI, students once they're deployed abroad, they're able to manage local staff, conduct interviews, and perform complex tasks in the language, but pretty much all of them report that one of the things that they dread is having conversations with people, especially having conversations in group settings. And so I think a lot of times conversations with native speakers, especially in a group setting with a lot of background noise, it can feel very intimidating because it's very unpredictable. You can switch from one subject to another subject pretty quickly, and people are not really going to adapt to your rhythm if you're in a group. There are multiple solutions here. I think one of the most important aspects of this is really having a wide vocabulary, because then you're going to be able to understand a wide range of topics. One of the most important tools for developing a wide vocabulary that is long-lasting, that you will remember in the long term, is using a flashcard application. You can use Anki, for example, which is 100% free, or I have developed my own app, Fluent Falcon, link to that in the description. It's audio flashcards. So it's going to be a little less tedious compared to Anki. And also developing your listening fluency is really important so that you're able to understand people at a native speed without too many issues. I've also talked about that in another video. I'm going to put a link to this video in the description. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope that you liked it. Let me know what kinds of videos you want me to make in the future by posting a comment in the comment section below. And I'll see you in the next video.